You're coming with me. That's what the billionaire said to me. A maid with flour on my apron, a split lip, and 3 little girls asleep down the hall. If a stranger with the power to stop your pain looked you in the eye and said those 6 words, would you run toward the storm or back into the fire you already knew? Be honest. What would you do? I didn't run. I froze. Because before that moment, I had learned how to be invisible, how to move like air, how to hum a lullaby so quietly it barely existed, how to keep my head down and my hands busy and my heart small enough to hide. The Carters liked their servants like shadows, and I tried to be one, but pain still finds shadows. That morning was like all the others. Steel gray sky kitchen lights measuring flour by feel, the soft sound of my girls breathing in the tiny room off the pantry. Grace at 8, already a little mother. Faith at 6, quick to laugh. Hope at 4, tiny and serious, a curl stuck to her cheek. I kissed each forehead and told myself just one verse, just one lullaby today. A quiet one. Maybe no one will notice. Servants should be silent as shadows. Mrs. Carter had hissed the day before, right before her hand cracked across my face. I still tasted blood as I flipped the first pancake. Then her heels clicked in, that staccato that makes your stomach fold into itself, and she circled the island with a smile polished for donors and a cruelty polished for me. I shouldn't expect efficiency from someone who wastes her life birthing 3 useless girls. Useless. She stamped the word on my children like a label that might never wash off. I'm not brave, not really, but some words pull courage up out of you before fear can bury it. My daughters are not. The slap came fast. The spatula clattered. The room tilted. And still I kept flipping pancakes because survival with 3 kids sometimes looks like flipping pancakes with a ringing ear and a steady hand. Lunch was worse. The Carter Foundation's quarterly meeting, men in suits practicing concern like it was a second language, china thin enough to hear your heartbeat through it. I leaned to pour tea, my back seized. The cup slipped, a brown bloom spread across the tablecloth. And before anyone could gasp, she hit me again. The room went quiet. Expensive quiet, embarrassed quiet. And I felt it, a gaze that wasn't bored or cruel or politely pretending not to see. He noticed. Michael Anders. People said his money was taller than the church steeple. They also said he kept a vow of purity, which they joked about because they didn't understand it. He watched me like a man watching a promise get broken in front of him. He didn't speak, not then. Night fell. I knelt by my daughter's beds and whispered, "I'm sorry," so softly it felt like breathing. Upstairs, 3 floors higher, and a lifetime away, he paced a guest room and stared down at a house that hid bruises under chandeliers. Dawn came hard. Coffee in a pot that felt heavier than yesterday. The ache under my sleeves pulsing with each step. Mrs. Carter again, claws in a silk glove, grabbing my arm, accusing me of trying to catch Mr. Anders's attention like a desperate girl in a cheap movie. Then the slap, hot and mean in the morning air. And then puffs. The doorway filled with a kind of quiet that only real power makes. Michael stood there, still, calm eyes flat as iron. "Staff discipline." Mrs. Carter sang for him, a voice dipped in honey. "I apologize for the help's incompetence." He looked at her. He looked at me. He looked back at her. "The funding ends today," he said. 4 words, no drama, like he was setting a glass down. She laughed, brittle and sharp, but he didn't bother to answer her. He stepped toward me not a touch until he met my eyes and knew I wouldn't flinch. "You're coming with me." 6 words that silenced a house. "If it were you, what would you have done?" The staff lined the hallway like a hush. Outside, the sky ripped open, rain hammering the stone. He shrugged off a coat that probably cost more than all our belongings and wrapped it around my shoulders like it was nothing at all to keep someone else warm. We gathered the girls. Grace held her chin high to be brave. Faith asked if he had a piano, because kids believe good things live in the future. Hope pressed her face to my neck and fell asleep with a little sigh, like she had been waiting for the storm to drown out the yelling. We walked through a doorway people like me aren't supposed to cross, and he sheltered me with his own body all the way to the car. Yeah, that happened. His home was glass and stone and ocean beautiful, in a way that makes you whisper even when you're alone. Big doesn't always mean warm, but the front door opened and warmth met us like a person. Mrs. Donnelly, silver hair, sharp eyes, a voice that could scold a billionaire and soothe a child in the same breath. "Not in this weather," she told me when I tried to say we couldn't stay. "Not with those precious little ones." He carried hope with a care that made my throat ache. Rooms were already turned down like he had been expecting us, which I learned later he had because, in the night he'd called and said, "Prepare a suite, lay out pajamas that might fit set tea and a small first aid kit by the fire." He didn't pry. He didn't ask the questions curious people ask when they mistake curiosity for compassion. He asked only, "May I help?" And when I nodded, he cleaned the cut at my lip and dabbed ointment on my cheek with hands careful enough to make me want to cry. I whispered a thank you to God because I had to tell somebody. In the firelight, his eyes shone and he looked away fast like a man who knew what it cost to see too much. Morning. Pancakes again because the world keeps spinning, and the sound of my girls giggling at plates dotted with strawberries like little rubies. He stood in the study with the ocean behind him, voice steady, cutting ties with the Carters without a single wobble. When I tried to thank him, he said without turning, "Please, you don't owe me anything." Later over dishes, Mrs. Donnelly told me how they'd found him at 10. Under a bed, shaking his mother gone, his father gone, a house full of ghosts. She didn't tell me to pity him. She told me to understand the shape of his gentleness. Days took on a rhythm. Breakfast together. Not me standing in a corner, but me at the table with a cup of real coffee and the sound of laughter that didn't feel like it would be punished. A piano arrived that afternoon. "The piano is for everyone," he told Faith when she stared like it was a museum piece. He played a simple melody, something old and quiet, fingers confident, but stunned to be useful this way, and I swear you could feel the walls breathe. He handed the girls envelopes for school supplies. Hope wrapped herself around his leg like little kids do with the people they have already decided are safe. He froze, then patted her head gently, a smile flickering like a match in a dark room. I tried to clean to justify my presence. He took the duster steady but kind. "You're not a servant here," he said. "You are my guest." I wanted to argue about dignity and earning your keep, but instead he said, "Then earn it by eating with us." We visited the shelter his foundation supports because I asked to see where the money goes. Pastor Ruth met us at the door, eyes like a lighthouse. Women sat at tables with kids on their laps, the air thick with tired hope. I held a baby so a girl could eat with 2 hands for the first time in a week. Across the room, he watched me with a kind of wonder that made me feel seen and not studied. The staff whispered after we left. People always whisper. Then the photos hit. Someone had taken pictures in the rain. the coat on my shoulders, his hand guiding me through a door. And by evening, a story with teeth had learned to run. Billionaire rescues Maid, rumors swirl, anonymous sources chirp, and comments crawl out from under the internet's floorboards. His assistant begged him to put out a statement. "Just something to explain, sir." He shook his head. "I will not explain kindness." Do you think that's fair? That compassion needs a press release to count? 2 mornings later, police came with a warrant charges filed by Mrs. Carter for theft, and a phrase I had never heard that sounded like a disease: moral turpitude. News vans crowded the gate like vultures at a highway crash. My girls clung to me. I told them it would be okay, and my mouth went dry at the lie of it. His lawyer arrived quick and certain, saying baseless and retaliatory like bullets on our side. The house felt like a courthouse and a circus at the same time. He stepped into the kitchen, tie-loosened voice quiet. "I need to speak to the press. Will you trust me?" I nodded because somehow I did. We stood on the steps under gray sky and camera flashes. Questions came like arrows. Did he help me escape charges? Was I a thief? What was our relationship? He raised a hand and the noise died. "She is innocent," he said, "and under my protection." Simple words heavier than any headline. Back inside, I broke. "Your reputation," I said through tears. "Your work, the board, the donors. I am pulling you into a storm." He took my hands, warm, steady. "If they won't let you stand alone," he said, "then stand beside me." And here came the twist that flipped the table. "Marry me," he said, not romantic, not dramatic, just true. "Today, legally, it's the fastest way to protect you and the girls. My lawyers agree." I asked why take on all of us? "Because it's right," he said, "and because you deserve peace." We signed papers in his study at dusk, Mrs. Donnelly bearing witness, while my daughters slept in a tangle of blankets on the couch. He kept a respectful distance, kept a vow that wasn't about being cold. It was about not using people to fix a hole that kindness should heal. No kiss. No performance. Just a choice that felt enormous and oddly quiet. That night, the mansion didn't feel like a museum anymore. It felt like shelter. The backlash didn't stop. The paper called our marriage a convenience. Parents at school whispered to their kids, and one afternoon, Grace came home with hot cheeks because a girl told her she was a charity case. I asked for a pause. Homeschool for a while. He nodded, hired Ms. Peterson, a teacher, with a gentle laugh, and turned the library into a classroom. On a stormy night, the power went out, and we lit candles and played Scrabble, and he tried to sneak in a word like quixotic, and I teased him for being exactly that, and he looked at me across the board in a way that made the air different. Hope fell asleep with her head on his knee. We carried the girls to bed and said goodnight in a hallway that suddenly felt like a home. Then the call, early, his lead investor, donors threatening to pull out. "The optics are terrible," the voice said. "Distance yourself. We can spin it." I walked by with coffee just in time to hear those words like a nail in wood. He said no. Once. Twice. Again. He said no like a man taking hits in the ribs, and I knew what I was going to do before the thought finished forming. Sometimes love protects by leaving. I wrote a letter at his desk and asked God to read the parts I couldn't write without sobbing on the page. I thanked him for dignity. I said I wouldn't be the reason the shelter lost beds, the reason survivors lost second chances. I packed a small bag, nothing he bought us, and woke my girls at 4:15. Where's Michael? Grace asked. Sometimes love means letting go before you cause harm, I said, and it hurt to speak. We slipped out into a dark morning that felt like it had teeth. He found my letter at 6. Mrs. Donnelly told me he fell to his knees and prayed like a boy who had lost everything twice. I was at Pastor Ruth's shelter scrubbing pans, pretending hot water burns less than grief. 10 days later, Hope woke with a fever and a breath that wasn't right. The ER lights were too bright. Words like congenital heart defect and surgery and risk crowded the room. My stomach dropped at the money question. Not now, Pastor Ruth said, squeezing my hand. And then she called him. He drove through fog like purpose was a road only he could see, arrived before the press looked out a hospital window at microphones gathering like crows and said, "Let them come." He walked outside and took every question straight on. "Yes," he told them, "I'm here with my wife and our daughters." Our. The word landed like a promise I hadn't known how to believe. They asked why he married a maid. He gave them one sentence I wish would trend forever. Because love is not a scandal, it's salvation. Stick around because what happened next will blow your mind. He told them about his mother, a woman who died under a man's hands while her boy hid under a bed and made up stories where nights ended in peace. He said he saw me and saw her and could not look away. The air changed. Cameras lowered. A reporter wiped her eyes like maybe empathy is contagious. Donations crashed the shelter's website. The hospital board covered most of the cost. People can be cruel. They can also be astonishing. We waited in a room where clocks are louder than thunder. He told me about the librarian who saved new books for him, and the lunch lady who slipped extra food into his bag, small mercies that multiplied. I told him about the nights I prayed for strength because I'd given up on rescue. "Maybe that's why God sent me," he said softly, and for once it didn't sound like a line. It sounded like truth. The surgeon walked in at last with tired eyes and a kind mouth. "She's going to be okay." My knees gave out. He caught me. Relief isn't a word. It's air. I went to the chapel with what was left of my words. He found me there and knelt beside the pew like it was just another floor between us and said, "Without you and the girls, none of it means anything." We made a new vow, the kind you keep with presence instead of distance. No more protecting each other by disappearing. No more pretending love can survive in a safe room with the lights off. Hope healed. The girls bloomed. He started to draw again. Storms, waves, then always a line of light breaking through. And he told me his mother used to say, "Art is how you speak what your mouth can't." He went on a national interview and didn't polish anything. He admitted he had built walls and called them principles, and love had walked through anyway. Letters poured in. The shelter expanded. Women showed up with bags and babies and names for what had happened to them. Because sometimes language is the first door to freedom. We cried in gratitude more times than I can count. One Sunday, in a church that once heard me whisper a prayer from the end of myself, Pastor Ruth preached about redemption like she had homework from heaven, and I didn't see that he wasn't in his usual seat. She called me forward for an announcement, and my girls were practically vibrating because children are terrible at keeping beautiful secrets. He stepped from a side door with Mrs. Donnelly behind him, a small velvet box in her hand, and the biggest smile I've ever seen. He took my hands under the cross, where I once begged to be remembered, and said, "When I first saw you, you were trying to hide bruises with quiet dignity. I recognized the pain. But what stunned me wasn't the hurt. It was your capacity to love through it. I vowed to keep myself alone because I thought alone meant safe. Then I found someone worth everything I am. Ellie Hayes, will you marry me? Not for protection this time, not for headlines, but for love. Yes, Faith announced for me because of course she did. The congregation laughed and cried, and I said yes with my whole life. Home became loud in the right ways. Hope practiced amazing grace on keys that finally belonged to joy. Grace joined a choir and learned how to carry a note and a room. Faith covered the fridge in drawings of us, stick figures with capes we didn't need anymore. We set the table like the ordinary was sacred, and lit candles for no reason except that we'd survived. Can I say grace? Hope asked, small hand lifted. Thank you for making our family out of love. Thank you for Mommy's cooking and Daddy's hugs and our home. Thank you for sending angels when we needed them most. Amen. Amen, I whispered, because what else do you say when mercy proves itself louder than gossip? Now I know some of you will have questions, and I want you to. People will argue about power and rescue and optics, about billionaires and maids, and whether love can be clean in a world that puts a price tag on everything. Good. Let's argue like people who care. Here's what I know from living it. He didn't buy me. He didn't save me for a camera. He stepped between a woman and the harm aimed at her because once no one stepped between his mother and danger. He chose to lose donors rather than lose his soul. He kept a vow when it mattered most. Was it messy? Yes. Was it fast? Absolutely. Was it worth it? I'll let my daughter's steady heartbeat answer that. So tell me, if it were you, would you have taken me in knowing the headlines and the board meetings and the friends who only like saints when they're quiet? Do you think it's fair that women are still measured by whispers and men by optics? Should kindness need a committee to be valid? You know what I mean. Drop your thoughts below, even if you disagree with me, especially if you do. Let's talk about what love should look like when the world is watching, what responsibility looks like for people with money and microphones, what it means to use power like a shelter instead of a weapon. If this story stayed with you, hit subscribe so you don't miss tomorrow's piece. I'll bring you another story crafted from real aches and real hope. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me the moment that made you mad, the moment that made you breathe easier, or the moment you don't buy at all. And if you've lived something like this, if you've ever had to choose reputation or rescue, leave a line for the next person scrolling at 2 a.m. so that 6 words might find them too and change everything.